Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Classical Academy Podcast, your friendly guide to the world of classical Christian education. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Phillips. Listen, gang, before we get started, if you are enjoying our podcast, as we know you are, please subscribe and give us a review. And please share the podcast with friends, with family, with everyone you know who could use a friendly guide to the world of classical Christian education. Now, let me ask you a question. Have you ever been at a loss for words? You ever experienced writer's block? How did the ancient writing teachers train their students to produce a flow of powerful and elegant writing? Well, my guest tonight, who will help us answer these questions, is Laurie Sachs. Laurie teaches 7th grade writing and grammar, directed studies, and the yearbook elective here at Trinity, which I believe they have a deadline coming up. So we got to get her in and out. Laurie is a woman of many talents. She earned a master's degree in history, and she has earned awards for her photography. And as much as she enjoys smiling, Laurie says that grammar is her favorite. Now listen to this. She once took the epic 310-word sentence from Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail, and she did a grammatical sentence diagram on it. I'm exhausted. And she did it just for fun. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, Laurie. Laurie, it is great to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here.
Now, we're going to be talking about the Chreia. What is it? Why do we study it?
Okay, so the Chreia is a stage of our Progymnasmata curriculum that we use.
Progymnasta.
Progymnasmata.
Yeah.
So pro in Greek means before, and gymnasmata means exercises.
Okay.
So it's literally the exercises we teach students before we teach them formal rhetoric.
Fabulous.
And it's been used in Western culture for thousands of years.
Good. And so that takes us to the Chreia. What is it? Why do we teach it? Why do we study it?
So the Chreia is a way for students to elaborate their ideas. We can teach students grammar and vocabulary, syntax and style, all kinds of things. But if we don't teach them how to organize and elaborate on their thoughts well, they're really at a disservice. So the Chreia is an excellent curriculum to help students organize their ideas and elaborate their main thought.
So exactly. So you can know grammar well, know even some nice big words, their definitions, but if you cannot organize your thoughts and learn some basic tools for doing that,
Right.
What good is all that other going to do you?
Right. Well, imagine trying to approach a 30-page senior thesis with no organizational structure.
Oh, my goodness.
It would be nearly impossible.
Sure.
So we're building the foundation starting in 4th grade, but certainly in 7th grade. We're building that foundation for students to learn how to organize their thoughts, and we're giving them tools to do so. And that's what the Chreia stage of the Pro-Gym does.
So before the gymnasium of words, that's where we get the word gymnasium, gang. I guess you figured that out by now, exercise. Before we get into that, you show them these basic tools. So how does the Chreia fit in to that?
So the Chreia is a set of 8 tools that help students elaborate their ideas. And I try to, at the beginning of the year, I have my students imagine that I'm giving them an empty toolbox. And this year we're going to fill that toolbox with tools.
Ah, yes.
And the first set of those tools are called the heads of development. They're the tools we use to develop an idea.
And that's the 8 development heads or modes, I think some modern word for that.
Exactly.
Right.
And then there's more tools they learn along with that. But what I try to stress to them is that the tools I'm teaching them, they don't exist in a vacuum. They're tools that students can use their whole lives.
Sure.
They can use them in writing any kind of paper, in giving any kind of oration. These are tools that are useful for a number of purposes, and not just for this one paper they're going to write in 7th grade.
Right. Well, we were talking before the program. I was realizing when I was looking over the notes that I really, in the sciences, when they do papers here, I really need to remind them, use these tools.
Yeah.
Impress me with these 8 modes of development, these 8 heads of development.
Right.
And so if you wouldn't mind, I think it'd be interesting to hear about those, these developmental tools, these heads of development.
Sure. So there are 8 developmental tools. The first one is encomium.
Encomium.
And encomium is simply stated, it's a paragraph of praise.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine how useful that is to be able to praise something well. You could use that in any context.
Mm-hmm.
If you wanted to give a eulogy at a funeral, or if you wanted to speak at a retirement party for someone that you love. If you wanted to write a paper for your science class about a scientist that you admire.
Or how about praising the creator of life?
Absolutely.
And, the Psalms are like full of encomium, it seems.
Yep,
Yes?
Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
So being able to praise something well is an invaluable skill and something our students really need to understand how to do.
You bet. Okay, and then?
The next is paraphrase, and that is just as it sounds. It's being able to paraphrase a wise saying. So a Chreia, what that actually means is it's a wise saying, and that's the structure of this paper. We give the students a wise saying.
So Chreia is wise saying.
That is a wise saying.
That's what it's all about, okay.
And we give the students a wise saying that then they elaborate on and write a paper about using these specific tools.
Fantastic.
So the paraphrase is simply a paraphrase, being able to restate something in simpler terms to better understand it.
Now, how does paraphrase, I know it fits into classical teaching. I know it may be a little different from what we're talking about grammatically, but this is something I know I do regularly. I said, now somebody share back with me what you just heard. I would trust everything they're learning in chemistry is wisdom, but is that similar? The
Absolutely.
whole idea of being able to put back in your words some law of chemistry, reaction rates or whatever, putting it back in your own words.
Absolutely.
Right.
And it is a way for teachers to certainly test a student's knowledge and make sure they understand the content. But in our writing curriculum, it's something that we teach students from a really young age.
Right.
We have them paraphrase all sorts of
Fabulous.
things. They retell stories in their own words. They retell stories maybe from the perspective of a different character. It's a skill that they use throughout the grammar stage. And then when they get to the logic stage, now they're ready for their own invention.
Sure.
And they're able to use those skills in a bit more sophisticated way.
And so in a sense, paraphrase, they're relearning as they reiterate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
Fabulous.
and if you can explain something well, you probably understand it well. If you can't explain it well,
Yes, correct.
there's a lack of comprehension.
And now I know the next one is something you consider very important.
Yeah.
And that's the next head of development.
The cause and converse. And those really go together. So the cause and converse are paragraphs that contrast good and bad outcomes. So imagine this in the context of science. That could be really useful for a student to use.
Sure.
A wise saying that students write on in the 7th grade, one of the sayings that we use is, each man is like those in whose company he delights. So we have students ponder that, and I have them imagine, what does it look like if you follow that wise saying? You choose your friends carefully. What does that look like in your life? What's the outcome of that? What's the outcome of choosing your friends wisely and then having a positive outcome? And then on the flip side, what does it look like when you don't choose your friends wisely and you have a poor outcome? So that's really what the cause and converse is. The students are able to write a little narrative, and they may talk about a girl at school who makes wonderful friends, grows in her faith, grows in her studies, grows in confidence because she has supportive, wonderful friends around her, and there's a positive payoff. And on the flip side, maybe another girl doesn't choose her friends wisely and succumbs to gossip and to envy.
Yes.
And maybe doesn't put attention on the important things like her faith and her studies and those things that are edifying. So the cause and converse are really important paragraphs. It allows the students to get creative, but to elaborate on the wise saying that they're exploring.
Sure. How about in the absence of courage, truth is an orphan? Would that be one you could work with?
Sure. In the absence of courage, truth is an orphan. So I would ask my students to ponder How might someone pursue truth through being courageous?
Yes, fantastic.
And they would think about, maybe a young man who wants to share the gospel, but is afraid to do so.
Yes.
And he pushes through that fear. He does it afraid.
Wow.
Well, that could be really valuable. What could be the outcome of that? He could change lives.
Someone's
really.
eternal soul.
So
Pretty
you really
important.
could use almost any wise saying as a Chreia if
Fabulous.
it's something that could be followed and would produce a good outcome. That's the type of quotes that we like to use.
Great. So we're on the heads of development. How about analogy?
Analogy is so important. So analogy is something I think we as adults use analogies a lot, and certainly as educators we use analogies a lot. And they're very useful for illustrating a point or helping students to see an idea in another way. But for students, it doesn't come naturally to them. One of the Chreias that we use this year in 7th grade is a painless life can be found by none. And so I have students think about, what do you expect of life? Does everyone's life have some trials and tribulations and difficulties?
Sure.
And could that be formative for you? Are you formed by those difficulties and those challenges? So when we talk about analogy, I help them think about it in terms of nature. And the easiest analogy for that particular wise saying is, just as a caterpillar must enter a dark and lonely cocoon to become a beautiful butterfly, so too must we experience trials and tribulations to become what God intended for us to be. That type of analogy really brings home the point because the students understand how a butterfly works.
Yes. Yes.
When I give that assignment, I get the most interesting ideas. I've had students come up with swords forged in fire.
Oh, indeed.
Cupcakes put through a hot oven
Wow.
to become delicious.
Yum.
Once you kind of introduce the idea of how you can use analogy to explain your point, they really get into it and they get excited about it.
You bet. That's fantastic. And so next would be?
Next is example.
Example.
We ask students to find an example from history, literature, or the Bible that supports the wise saying. So if it's a saying, like a painless life can be found by none,
Yes.
you're looking for people who persevere.
Bible is full of that.
I mean, Moses and Job and
Yes.
Joseph. There are so many examples of people who persevere through difficulties and find success.
Sure.
And especially for my young men, this is one where they often pull in sports figures because that's something they can relate to. Someone pushing through and persevering.
Sure. You bet.
So that's the example head of development.
Right. I mean, even our Lord sweating drops of blood in the garden. Wow.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it makes it real for them because they can envision other people who suffered difficulties. I think when you're a middle schooler, I think maybe sometimes life looks easy for adults. Like everything just works out and it seems so easy.
Yes.
And that's not how anything works.
That's for sure.
So if we help them understand that things are hard and that's okay. It's okay to push through when something is hard. I think that's such a useful lesson to teach.
That's fantastic. And then we have
the next one is testimony.
testimony.
Testimony is also extremely important. Testimony is where the students find a quote that supports the wise saying. And being able to use quotes effectively is just such an important skill. In any paper they're going to write for any class,
Sure.
they're going to use quotations. Can you find a quote that is, pertinent? Can you explain it well and tie it back to your main idea?
Wow.
So
Fabulous.
for that particular wise saying, a painless life can be found by none, there's so many great quotes about perseverance. Thomas Edison once said, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work."
Yes, indeed.
What an illustration of
So
perseverance,
fabulous,
right?
isn't it? Yes.
Yeah. So students find a quote and then they effectively relate it to the main idea and again help develop that idea by giving examples of other people's writing and other people's thoughts.
Fantastic. And then wrapping up the heads
We
of development.
wrap it up with the epilogue. And so the epilogue basically praises the wise saying or the author and then calls on the audience to agree that this good advice should be heeded.
Fantastic. That's beautiful. So, Laurie, I love how you keep talking about wise sayings, and floating around the back of my mind is this secondary benefit, or maybe it's even a primary benefit of not only teaching the Chreia, but discussing the wise sayings themselves. How is that going to benefit the students? I mean, the question almost answers itself, but I wanted to hear from you. Do you see how that can benefit the students, and what do you observe there when you're actually discussing these wise sayings and supporting it?
Absolutely. I think obviously we're teaching them how to develop an idea, but secondarily, we're immersing them in good things. We're immersing them in wisdom that is edifying, that's good for their souls, and we're having them ponder how to make good choices. If I followed this advice, I would have this kind of result. Is that important in my life? If I choose my friends carefully, is the payoff worth it? Certainly it is. So I think immersing our students in wisdom and using wise words of those who came before us, whether it's from the Bible, we could be doing something from Psalms or from Proverbs. We're giving them words to ponder that are useful and good and proven. And we're having them write on those kinds of topics.
Fantastic.
I think it's so beneficial for their character development as well as their development as writers.
So, and indeed, it does shape the students, not only increasing their ability to write, but they're really thinking about higher things.
Well, we're
these
shaping
virtuous things.
We're shaping their souls. And while we're all educators and we're here to teach them and teach them skills that will be useful for them, our goal goes beyond that.
Sure.
We're trying to shape their souls. We're trying to raise them to be good Christians and to really think about what kind of people they want to be in the world.
Yes.
And I think this curriculum does such a good job at sort of immersing them in those kinds of things.
It really does. And then it helps them learn to communicate the light that is within their soul.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's wonderful. Now, let's say I'm a parent at home. I'm hearing about this Chreia, these 8 heads of development. What might be a question that I could ask my student about the Chreia, and that I could ask my student about this and get into a discussion with them?
Yeah, I think for one, it would be useful to ask the student what the particular wise saying means to them, and have them explain, what it means, and give you some analogies. Talk about comparisons of good and bad outcomes if you're following this wise advice. The last assignment that I give my students in the Chreia stage before we move on to something else in 7th grade, I let them choose their own quote. And I started doing that probably 4 or 5 years ago. I let them, they have to get it approved. It has to be good advice that, if followed, would produce a positive result. And I have to say, doing that has just borne so much fruit.
Wow.
Because they're choosing something that's meaningful to them, and then they're really immersing themselves in that topic. So I get all kinds of things. I've had students choose song lyrics. I've had students choose, quotes by athletes. I've had students choose quotes from Kung Fu Panda.
Sure.
And all sorts of
Winnie the Pooh.
Winnie the Pooh, certainly. All sorts of bits of wisdom, places where they can search for wisdom, and then ponder it and evaluate it and elaborate on it. And the papers that I got from them, having them choose their own topic, were just, incredible, because they're invested and they're choosing something that they're interested in and that's meaningful for them.
Wow. I think the task I'm going to do is come up with one from Yogi Berra.
I'm sure you can find one. I'm sure you can find one.
That's great. Now, I can see how this might really help in that transition from grammar into logic. So let's talk a little bit about classical education.
Yeah.
What happens in grammar, what happens in logic, and how does teaching the Chreia fit in with that model?
Absolutely. So, in the grammar stage of the trivium, our students are doing a lot of memorization, and they're learning songs and chants, and they're working with information, and they're learning how to learn. That's what we're teaching them to do at the grammar stage. My 7th graders are ready to move beyond that. They're ready to put aside the things of childhood, and they're ready for more. They're ready to be challenged. They're ready to analyze. They're ready to really delve in and think about bigger topics. But they need the tools to do that.
Sure.
And so this curriculum really provides that in giving them a very structured format in which they can develop an idea.
Sure.
And they can really use that brain muscle to analyze information beyond just memorizing facts. So I think the logic stage is such an exciting time for our students. I love teaching that age. They have wonder, they're still very innocent, but they're ready to take those next steps.
You bet.
And this curriculum really facilitates that.
And what a gift. And folks, how fortunate if you have a student out there who is sitting under Laurie's teaching and learning these skills and looking at these wise sayings and letting them become a part of the very soul of your child. That's a beautiful thing. And even if you don't have a student in classical education, I hope you're encouraged now to look at wise sayings, whether it's Proverbs or Psalms or from wherever, to look at wise sayings in a new way and maybe do a little bit of your own pondering from this model of the Chreia. I know it's inspired me to do that. I'm going to do it a little bit more in this home stretch of our school year. I'm going to bring it into the sciences more. You've inspired me. Thank you for that, Laurie.
Thank you. That sounds excellent.
It has been great to have you with us tonight. And gang, it has been wonderful to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us on the Classical Academy podcast, presented by Trinity U, a service of Trinity Classical Academy here in Santa Clarita, California. Our producer is Shay Ramquist. Stephen Petrie is our audio engineer and provides our original music, the outro music you're hearing right now. So until next time, let's all continue to grow in wisdom, in virtue, and in the love of God.